you can't go to a farm conference without hearing, about precision ag and big data and the cloud and all these mysterious sorts of things, and trying to have fact data-based decision making. Well, there's a downside to some of this too, potentially, you need to be aware of. And my next guest is Todd Jansen. He's with Jansen Ag Law. You can follow him on Twitter at Jansen Law. Todd, how's it going?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hey, it's great to chat with you. So, when I think of cyber hacking of precision ag, this is kind of scary, to be honest with you, because the more you start to think about it, the more you realize how much of this stuff is potentially at risk. Who is likely to want to hack and gain access to precision ag data, and what would they actually do with the information?
Right. It's a question that I feel like I often get asked, like, does anybody really want my ag data? Why would somebody want to, hack into this farm management software and find out what my yield was? And, I don't really know the answer to that question as far as who's out there that would want the information, but fortunately, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security recently looked at that question. And, they analyzed it to try and figure out, where the common threats might be. One of the interesting things that I found from that was that, we often think, is this, terrorists or somebody in a foreign country that's trying to get our information. But they pointed out that, one of the real threats is that a company may have a disgruntled employee that does something that releases data, or maybe it's even just carelessness from the company that allows data to escape and be out there in the World Wide Web and accessible to many people. And if you're the farmer or if you're the person whose data is being stored, it really doesn't matter how it happens. If it gets out there, it's out there. So it doesn't matter if it's the North Koreans or just a disgruntled employee.
Yeah, so if it was a disgruntled employee, are they destroying the data, or is there like a black market for ag data that they would be trying to reap the benefits of? It really does kind of make your mind sort of spin a little bit. You mentioned the Department of Homeland Security, the report they put out. They identified 3 principles for informational security. So they had confidentiality, integrity, and availability. What were your takeaways from that report when you read it?
Yeah, I thought that of those 3, the confidentiality is probably the biggest threat to precision ag or ag tech right now, because we do have a real explosion of these cloud-based platforms that are out on the market. And so, that's where I think the most likely or the biggest transition is happening in agriculture right now. And so we have a lot of new companies out there. We have a lot of farmers who are for the first time moving data into cloud-based platforms. And the report points out that the threats here are that a lot of these companies will outsource programming, and so it may not all be done in-house by people they know. They may rush to get products out, and so they're not necessarily paying attention to the latest security threats that might be require a new patch or a new download, and they don't get that out in time. So the confidentiality part, to me, was the biggest takeaway. But if you want to talk about integrity, not something I think we always think about, but what they're worried about is that somehow you could have rogue data insert into data streams, and that could cause all sorts of problems. And this, an example I like to think about here is if you had like a poultry barn or something where the rogue data that the sensors were either reading because it was faulty programming or nefariously inserted in there is that the building was a different temperature than it really was. And that could be a problem for one barn, or it could be a problem for hundreds of barns if this same sensor is widely used and synced with the cloud.
Yeah, see, this is where you start to get my mind spinning. It's not just about stealing the data and losing it. It's actually manipulating the data potentially. And when we're making decisions off some of that data, that kind of manipulation could be even the most hurtful. That really starts to make you, that should awake people to the concerns here. So I think there's a lot of trust from the farmer or the producer to the company that is managing this data. Because, a lot of times it's like, it's in the cloud. And it's like this mysterious sort of thing that we're just supposed to just go along with. In your opinion, is the precision ag industry doing enough to protect the data they're really ultimately responsible for?
Yes and no. I think some companies probably are, and some are just probably a little too sloppy at this point. We've got the Ag Data Transparent effort where we ask companies to identify, exactly how they use data, how they store data, what their privacy policies are. But we've only had less than 20 companies go through that certification process. So we could see still a lot of room for improvement there in the industry. I always think, too, that, most companies could do a lot better job of going through their contracts and making sure that they are adequately explaining to farmers what they are doing and how their data is stored. And so there's a lot of room for improvement yet in the precision ag industry to address these problems.
And so if, there is that part of it, but how do farmers take action, and how do they protect themselves from these sorts of data breaches that are potentially out there?
Yeah, I think, at the front end, they got to ask a lot of questions when they're signing up for these platforms. But then I'd say on the other end of it always pays to, keep backups of data. So, your data may be exposed and may get out there. And, perhaps somebody will use that against you. I think that's debatable how they might do that. But the other big problem is if that's the only place that you store your data and now you've lost years of data, that's damaging from a whole nother standpoint. So I'd say keeping backups is a really important thing to do.
I think when we talk about something like, cyber hacking of precision ag data, honestly, my mind, when I first thought about it, jumped to adversarial countries. You mentioned North Korea. I thought of China or Russia or whatever. They're all in a basket.
Right, yeah.
I thought of them and like food security and having an understanding of what's actually being, because they're, China, for example, was buying a lot of commodities from North America, that, and having access to the information to purchase things cheaper. Like it's about access to information. Am I just watching too many movies, or is that really a thing?
No, to me, I think that seems like the low-hanging fruit if you're a hacker, right? Or if you're somebody from a foreign country who wants to make money through doing this, is to try and get enough data that you can have, maybe some information about the market that the market doesn't yet have. So one of the things I think we have going for us right now is that no one system has enough data, I think, to really paint those pictures. But at some point down the road, when we see more consolidation, I think you will get to a point where you'll have some companies have enough data that it is very important to how the markets move, right? So if you had a hacker that got in there and messed with that information, it might cause a market shift that they could benefit from and farmers would lose out on.
It does make you think. I saw last night there was a grain company that was talking about how they've got, all this, they're coming up with a new software package where there's going to be all these great things for you. You just got to make sure you let us know what your yield is, your farm data, and then we'll help you market that crop better. But they're also the buyer of that grain. The reaction from farmers on Twitter was very, very sort of like skeptical and negative. Like, I don't want to give you all my information because we have that kind of a relationship. And so it does sort of make you think here more and more and more about who has access, how is that information being used, and honestly, you should be asking some of your providers, what are you doing to protect this information?
Right. Absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah. Hey, Todd, I really appreciate you joining me here today on Real Ag Radio. You have a great blog. I encourage everybody to check it out. It is www.aglaw.us/Jansen Aglaw. Todd, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Sean. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Really, really important subject that no matter if you are livestock or you're in crops, vegetables, whatever form of agriculture, this is an issue that definitely impacts you. You need to be making sure you're asking the right questions.